You ever hear a story that's so specific, so weird, you just brush it off, but then you hear almost the exact same story from someone totally different, miles and years away? Well, today, we're not just telling spooky stories. We're kind of going to treat this like an investigation. We're going to pull apart a whole collection of modern horror stories from the Appalachian Mountains, see what patterns keep showing up, and figure out what makes them so deeply unsettling. All right, let's get into it. This one sentence, right from the source material, just perfectly nails the feeling that runs through every single one of these accounts. It's this powerful underlying warning, that some doors are meant to stay shut, and some paths are meant to be left alone. It really sets the tone for everything that's about to come. So here's our game plan. First, we'll dive into the Appalachian enigma itself. Then, we'll look at why people even go into these forgotten places to begin with. After that, we'll catalog all the terrifying things they run into, check out the weird warnings left behind, and finally, try to piece together what it all means, this idea of the unknowable wild. Okay, so our investigation starts right here, in the ancient, sprawling wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, these mountains have always had their folklore, right? But something new is bubbling up, a really consistent and honestly a deeply creepy kind of story. And these aren't old wives' tales, these are modern, first-person accounts of things that just can't be explained. For this whole breakdown, we're basically looking at 8 different personal stories, as if they're case files. Think of them like eyewitness testimony. Our goal isn't to prove or disprove any of it. It's to find the overlaps, the startlingly similar details that hint at something much, much bigger going on. All right, let's talk about how these stories even get started. I mean, any good story needs a setup, but what's wild is that these accounts share an almost identical beginning. So what is it that pulls these people out to the middle of nowhere, and what happens the second they step over the line? The pattern is it's incredibly consistent. First up, it's almost always a reluctant return. Somebody inherits an old family cabin, or they're cleaning out a property for a relative who passed away. They're not looking for trouble. Then they cross some kind of forgotten boundary. A rusted gate barely hanging on, or a driveway totally choked with weeds. And third, almost immediately they get that feeling, that prickly, hair on the back of your neck feeling that they are being watched. This quote right here, it just gets to the heart of it. This isn't just a random thought from some hiker. It shows that these people feel, almost instantly, that they're walking on land with a dark, forgotten history, a history that maybe isn't quite over yet. And now we get to the real core of this thing, the encounters themselves. Once these people are out there, all alone, what are they actually seeing and hearing? This is where stories from totally different people in totally different places start to sound terrifyingly alike. Okay, let's start with Exhibit A. This absolutely chilling description comes from a guy who went back to his late grandparents' house. He hears this scraping from under the floorboards, and then a hatch in his kitchen just creaks open. What he saw next is basically the foundation for the first recurring thing we're going to talk about. Now, here's the wild part. These details aren't from just one story. We're piecing this together. The unnaturally long limbs, that shows up in Ridgefield Valley and Fox Hollow. The pale, featureless skin, that's described in the Blue Ridge Cabin story. So we're building this composite creature, and it taps right into that primal fear of something that looks almost human, but is just so wrong. But the terror isn't always visual. A lot of the time, it's what they hear, and it's always something deeply personal. This quote is from a man camping out in Fox Hollow. After seeing one of those pale creatures, he hears the voice of his mother, who had been gone for years, calling his name from the dark woods. And this brings us to our second major phenomenon, the mimic. You see, the mimic isn't just a creature, it's a tactic. It's a form of psychological warfare. In one story, it uses the voice of a man's mother and his missing friend. In another, a guy hears these strange, rasping whispers in a language he doesn't recognize. It's a full-on assault that weaponizes the sounds we trust the most, turning a loved one's voice into the source of absolute dread. It basically corrupts the very idea of safety. But it's not always about these direct, terrifying encounters. No, a lot of these stories are filled with indirect clues, warnings that feel intelligent and very territorial. These aren't just random things happening. They feel like messages. And when you lay it all out like this, you can really see the patterns. On the physical side, you get things like a silhouette of a person carved into tree bark and left on a car door, or little animal skulls tied together with twine. Then, on the auditory side, it's just as deliberate. A repeated two-note whistle, slow, methodical tapping on the walls. I mean, come on, those are not normal sounds of the forest. They're signals.
And then there's this number, 3. It just keeps popping up. The warnings, they often come in threes. The sign that reads, "No return trail," 3 words. One guy hears 3 little taps on his camper, and later 3 short raps on the door. Another narrator is tormented by a pattern of 3 sharp raps on the walls. This isn't random. It feels intentional, almost ritualistic. So, we've looked at the setup, we've cataloged the creatures, we've examined the warnings. Now we get to the final and, frankly, the most unsettling part of all of this. What does all this evidence, when you put it all together, actually point to? This is it. This is the real takeaway. A pale crawler is terrifying, sure. A mimic is the stuff of nightmares. But the real monster here? It's the pattern itself. The fact that a guy in Kentucky and a woman in North Carolina, years apart, can describe the exact same impossible thing, the same unnatural sounds, that tells us we're not dealing with isolated campfire stories. It suggests there's some underlying terrifying truth about this wilderness. And that brings us to the final question, doesn't it? If it's not just one creature, then what is the real horror at the heart of all these modern folktales? What is the one single message that all these different voices are desperately trying to tell us? This is the answer. The real horror is that unified voice. It doesn't matter if it's a whisper from behind a door, a pale shape between the trees, or skulls tied to a wire. The message is always, always the same. It's some ancient, hostile presence, letting us know that we have trespassed, that we are not welcome, and that some places in this world should stay unexplored.